Zoreya stood before the gleaming gates of Earth's International University of Sinological Studies, her iridescent skin shimmering under the warm sunlight. As a Lizerian xenoanthropologist, she had spent years studying various species, but humans fascinated her the most. Their strange ways of showing affection without using telepathy both confused and intrigued her. The university campus buzzed with activity as students from dozens of alien species mingled with humans. Zoreya's antenna twitched nervously as she made her way to the Department of Interspecies Relations. Her research project on human bonding methods had been approved last month, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming sensory experience of being on Earth. "Welcome to IUXS," a warm voice called out. Zoreya turned to see a human male approaching her with what she recognized from her studies as a smile. He was tall for a human, with kind eyes and black hair that showed slight traces of gray at the temples. "I'm Professor James Chen," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'll be your research partner for the duration of your stay." Zoreya bowed in the traditional Lizerian greeting, keeping her hands close to her body to avoid accidental touch telepathic contact. "Thank you, Professor Chen. I am Zoreya of the Third Sphere of Lizeria." As they walked through the campus, James explained the basics of the university's facilities. Zoreya found herself distracted by the constant display of physical contact among humans, students hugging, friends patting each other's backs, couples holding hands. On Lizeria, such prolonged physical contact was considered primitive and unnecessary. "Is something bothering you?" James asked, noticing her attention wandering. "I apologize," Zoreya said, her antenna drooping slightly in embarrassment. "It's just, there's so much touching. How do humans communicate emotions so clearly without telepathic connection?" James chuckled softly. "That's exactly why your research here will be valuable. Humans have developed countless non-telepathic ways to express emotions. Physical touch is just one of them." They reached the research department, where James showed her to her new office. The room was adapted for Lizerian comfort, with soft purple lighting and a temperature regulation system set to her species' preferences. "Tomorrow, we'll begin our first observation session," James explained. "We have volunteer couples who have agreed to be part of your study on human bonding methods." Zoreya's antenna perked up with interest, and they will demonstrate their physical bonding rituals. "Within appropriate boundaries, yes," James said with a gentle smile. "Remember, Zoreya, humans consider some forms of physical affection private, just as your people keep certain telepathic exchanges private." Later that evening, as Zoreya settled into her quarters, she wrote in her research journal, "Day 1 on Earth. Humans continue to perplex me. Their reliance on physical contact seems inefficient compared to our telepathic bonds, yet they form connections that appear just as deep as ours. Professor Chen speaks of their bonding methods with such conviction that I find myself curious despite my cultural reservations. Perhaps there is more to learn here than I initially thought." She paused, looking out her window at the sunset painting the sky in colors remarkably similar to Lizeria's. A couple walked past below, their hands intertwined, laughing at something she couldn't hear. Zoreya touched her own hand thoughtfully, wondering what it felt like to connect with someone without the immediate rush of telepathic information. "This study may change more than just our understanding of human bonding," she wrote as her final entry for the day. "It might challenge everything my people believe about primitive physical connections." Little did Zoreya know just how right she was, or how her own perceptions would be transformed in the days to come. The next morning, Zoreya arrived early at the research lab, her antenna twitching with nervous energy. Today would be her first official observation of human couples, and despite her scientific training, she felt strangely anxious. Professor Chen was already there, setting up recording equipment. "Good morning, Zoreya," he greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Our first couple will be here in 10 minutes. Are you ready?" "I believe so," she replied, checking her data tablet. "Though I must admit, watching humans engage in physical bonding rituals feels invasive." James laughed softly. "Remember, They're just going to demonstrate normal public displays of affection, nothing private or inappropriate. The first couple arrived right on time. Sarah and Mike, both graduate students from the physics department. Zaraya watched with fascination as they naturally held hands while sitting down, their fingers intertwined. "Could you explain what you're feeling right now?" Zaraya asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her discomfort. Sarah smiled. "When Mike holds my hand, it makes me feel safe and loved. It's like a constant reminder that he's there for me." Zaraya's antenna drooped in confusion. But without telepathic connection, how can you be sure of his emotions? Mike squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "It's in the little things, the way she squeezes back, how her thumb rubs circles on my hand when I'm stressed, how warm her palm feels against mine." Throughout the day, Zaraya interviewed 5 more couples. Each pair demonstrated different forms of physical affection: hugs, kisses on cheeks, gentle touches on shoulders. With each demonstration, her confusion grew. During their lunch break, Zaraya turned to James. "Professor Chen, I don't understand. My people can share entire emotional landscapes in a single touch. These human gestures seem so limited." James considered her words carefully while sipping his coffee. "Maybe that's what makes them special, Zaraya. When you can't instantly know someone's feelings, every touch becomes meaningful. Every gesture carries weight." Zaraya watched him, noticing how his eyes crinkled when he spoke passionately about human behavior. Something about his enthusiasm made her own skin tingle strangely. Later that afternoon, disaster struck during their final interview. A clumsy student knocked over a water bottle, and James reached out instinctively to steady Zaraya as she stepped back. Their hands touched briefly. Zaraya gasped as a flood of emotions washed over her: concern, embarrassment, and something else, something warm and undefined. She pulled away quickly, her iridescent skin flushing a deeper purple. "I'm so sorry," James said immediately. "I forgot about your touch telepathy." Zaraya stood frozen, processing what she had felt. In that brief touch, she had sensed more genuine emotion than she expected possible from a non-telepathic species. It challenged everything she had been taught about humans. That evening, she sat in her quarters, struggling to write her research notes. Her hand still tingled where James had touched it. Instead of her usual clinical observations, she wrote, "Today has challenged my understanding of human bonding. Their physical expressions of affection may be simple, but they carry complex meanings. A single touch can convey comfort, protection, love. Emotions that we Lizerians believe can only be properly shared through telepathy. Yet in that accidental contact with Professor Chen, I felt." She paused, her antenna quivering as she searched for the right words. "I felt something I've never experienced in any telepathic exchange. Perhaps there is wisdom in their ways that my people have overlooked. Tomorrow, I will approach my research with a more open mind. After all, isn't that what science is about? Challenging our preconceptions." As she prepared for sleep, Zaraya caught herself touching the hand that had briefly connected with James, wondering what other surprises human physical bonding might hold. A week later, Zaraya found herself in an unexpected situation. The university was hosting its annual Interstellar Cultural Festival, and Professor Chen had insisted she attend. The large hall buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of worlds mingled, shared food, and, most intimidating of all, danced. "I don't understand this ritual," Zaraya said, watching couples move to the music. Her antenna twitched nervously as she stood beside James at the edge of the dance floor. "Why do humans sway together to sound waves?" James smiled, his eyes reflecting the colorful lights overhead. "Dancing isn't just about movement. It's about connection, rhythm, and letting go of your thoughts to just feel the moment." "Feel without telepathy?" Zaraya asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "That seems impossible. Would you like to try?" James extended his hand carefully, making sure not to touch her. "I promise to respect your telepathic boundaries. We can wear the special gloves provided for touch-sensitive species." Zoraia hesitated. Part of her research was to experience human bonding methods firsthand, but dancing seemed frighteningly intimate. Still, her scientific curiosity won out. She slipped on the protective gloves and slowly placed her hand in his. James led her to the dance floor just as a slow song began playing. "Just follow my lead," he said softly, placing one hand gently on her waist while holding her other hand. Small steps, like this. Zoraia felt stiff at first, too conscious of their proximity. Without her telepathy to guide her, she felt blind, unsure. But as they moved slowly to the music, something strange began to happen. She noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The steady rhythm of James's breathing, the subtle pressure of his hand guiding her movements, the warmth radiating from his body even through their protective clothing. It was a different kind of communication, wordless yet clear. "You're doing great," James encouraged as they turned slowly. "Try closing your eyes. Sometimes feeling is better than thinking." Zoraia closed her eyes, and suddenly the experience transformed. Without visual distractions, she became hyper-aware of their synchronized movement. The music seemed to flow through her body, and she found herself naturally following James's lead. "This is not unpleasant," she admitted, opening her eyes to find James watching her with a soft expression she couldn't quite decode. Without telepathy, his face became a map she wanted to learn to read. As they danced, other couples moved around them. Humans, aliens, and mixed pairs, all sharing in this strange ritual. Zoraia noticed how each pair moved differently, yet all seemed connected in their own unique way. The song ended too soon. As they stepped apart, Zoraia felt oddly bereft without James's gentle guidance. She looked at her gloved hands, wondering why such simple contact had affected her so deeply. "Thank you for the demonstration, Professor Chen," she said formally, trying to regain her scientific detachment. It was educational. James's eyes crinkled with amusement. "You can call me James, you know, and maybe we could try another dance later." Before Zoraia could respond, a group of Andromean delegates approached James, pulling him into a discussion about Earth customs. She watched him go, noticing how his hands moved expressively as he talked. Later that night, Zoraia made her research entry. "Today I experienced the human ritual of dancing. I expected it to be primitive and chaotic, but instead found it surprisingly sophisticated. Without telepathy to rely on, humans have developed an entire language of subtle physical cues. The experience was most enlightening, especially with with James." She paused, realizing she had used his first name in her official notes. Stranger still, she didn't want to correct it. Something was changing in her understanding of humans, and perhaps in herself as well. The crisis struck without warning. Zoraia was in the middle of interviewing another couple when the university's psi dampeners malfunctioned. These devices usually maintain safe levels of telepathic activity in the building, protecting sensitive species from psychic overflow. The first sign of trouble was a sharp pain in her antenna. Then the room began to spin as thousands of unfiltered thoughts and emotions crashed into her mind like a tidal wave. Zoraia collapsed to her knees, her iridescent skin turning pale with distress. "Everyone out," James commanded, quickly dismissing the research subjects. He rushed to Zoraia's side but stopped short of touching her, knowing it would only overwhelm her further. "Zoraia, what do you need?" She could barely speak through the psychic assault. Too many thoughts. "Can't. Shield." Her body trembled as she curled into herself, trying desperately to block out the flood of foreign emotions. James acted quickly. He grabbed the emergency psi-blocking blanket from the lab's safety kit and carefully draped it around her shoulders without making skin contact. The specially designed fabric helped dampen some of the psychic noise, but Zoraia still whimpered in pain. "Focus on my voice," James said softly, sitting cross-legged in front of her. "Don't try to process everything. Just listen to me." Through the chaos in her mind, Zoraia latched onto his calm, steady voice. James began describing his childhood home in Malaysia, The smell of his mother's cooking, the sound of rain on tin roofs, the feel of warm tropical air. His words created a pattern she could follow, a lifeline in the psychic storm. Hours passed as they waited for the dampeners to be repaired. James never left her side, continuing to talk softly about anything and everything. When his throat grew dry, he hummed quiet melodies. When that tired him, he recited old poems his grandmother had taught him. Gradually, Zoraya's breathing steadied. The psi-blocking blanket and James's constant presence helped her build a bubble of calm in the chaos. She found herself focusing not just on his words, but on the subtle changes in his expression, the gentle movements of his hands as he spoke, the way his eyes never left her face. Why? She managed to ask during a quiet moment. Why stay? James smiled softly. Because you needed someone. Simple as that. Zoraya felt something shift inside her. On Lizuria, comfort came through telepathic exchanges, quick, efficient bursts of soothing emotions. But here was James, using only his physical presence and voice to anchor her through the crisis. It was inefficient, primitive, and somehow more meaningful than any telepathic comfort she'd ever received. Finally, the engineers fixed the dampeners. As the psychic noise faded, Zoraya uncurled from her defensive position, exhausted but stable. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting James's concerned gaze. No one has ever." "You don't need to explain," he said gently. "Would you like me to walk you back to your quarters?" Zoraya nodded, too tired to maintain her usual professional distance. As they walked through the quiet evening campus, she found herself walking closer to James than necessary, drawing comfort from his presence, even without touch. That night, despite her exhaustion, Zoraya made herself write in her research journal. "Today I experienced something unprecedented. During a crisis where my telepathic abilities became a vulnerability, I discovered strength in human methods of comfort. Professor Chen, James, proved that deep connection doesn't require telepathy. His presence alone provided more support than any psychic link." She paused, her hand hovering over the tablet as she added, "Perhaps my people's dismissal of physical comfort as primitive was wrong. There is power in choosing to stay, in using voice and presence to help another. There is strength in human ways that I never understood before. And there is something about James that makes me want to understand more." The message from the Lizurian Council arrived early morning, its urgent priority status forcing Zoraya's communication device to chime loudly. Her antenna drooped as she read the stern words on her screen. "Researcher Zoraya of the Third Sphere, we have received disturbing reports about your conduct on Earth. Sources indicate you have engaged in primitive physical bonding rituals and shown concerning levels of emotional attachment to your human research partner. This behavior is unbecoming of a Lizurian scientist. Return home immediately for psychological recalibration." Zoraya's hands trembled as she set down the device. The past 2 months with James had changed her in ways she couldn't deny. After the Psi-dampener incident, they had grown closer. She had even started accepting brief touches, finding unexpected joy in the simple contact of their hands during their daily work. When she arrived at the lab that morning, James immediately noticed her distress. "What's wrong?" he asked, his familiar concern making her heart ache. "The council," she began, but was interrupted by Professor Martinez bursting into the lab. "James, we need to talk," Martinez said sharply. "There are concerns about your objectivity in this research project. Your colleagues have noticed your inappropriate closeness with the Lizurian subject." "Subject," James replied, his voice tight. "Zoraya is our guest researcher, not a test subject." Zoraya watched the exchange, feeling caught between two worlds. On one side, her people's beliefs about the superiority of telepathic bonding. On the other, everything she had learned about the depth and beauty of human connection. "The university board is considering reassigning this project to another professor," Martinez continued. "We can't risk our reputation with the Lizurian Council over a personal entanglement." James stood straighter, his usually gentle expression hardening. With all due respect, Professor Martinez, this research is groundbreaking precisely because we've moved beyond treating each other as mere subjects. Zoraya's insights into human bonding are revolutionary. While they argued, Zoraya touched her communication device, making a decision. She sent a message back to the council. Respectfully, I cannot return yet. My research is incomplete, and my findings may change how our species views human connections. What we dismissed as primitive may be key to deeper understanding between our peoples. The response was immediate and harsh. Your research credentials will be revoked if you persist in this defiance. Zoraya felt her chest tighten, but then she remembered how James had stayed with her during the Psi-dampener crisis, how his presence had meant more than any telepathic comfort she'd ever known. James, she interrupted the ongoing argument. Both professors turned to look at her. I need to tell you something. She stepped forward, removing her protective gloves, something she had never done in the lab before. James's eyes widened as she reached for his hand. Zoraya, your telepathy. He started, concerned. I know, she said softly. I want you to understand what I'm feeling, what this all means to me. Their hands touched, and James gasped as Zoraya carefully shared her emotions through the telepathic connection, her fear of losing her position, her confusion about their growing closeness, and underneath it all, a deep warmth she couldn't deny anymore. Professor Martinez watched in shock as tears formed in James's eyes at whatever he was experiencing through their connection. The council may revoke my credentials, Zoraya said, still holding James's hand. But I've discovered something here that matters more than academic recognition. I've learned that true connection transcends both physical and telepathic boundaries. It's about choice, about staying, about understanding each other in all ways possible. She turned to Martinez, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This isn't just about research anymore. This is about breaking down barriers between our species, and I choose to stay, whatever the consequences may be. 3 days after Zoraya's decision to stay, she found herself facing an unprecedented challenge, learning to court a human in the traditional Earth way. She had spent hours studying human dating customs, but theory was very different from practice. James, she said during their lunch break, her antenna twitching with nervous energy. Would you share sustenance with me in a romantic context this evening? James nearly choked on his coffee, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. Zoraya, are you asking me out to dinner? Yes, she said, her iridescent skin flushing a deeper purple. Though I understand if you find the proposal inappropriate, given our professional relationship and the current circumstances. Instead of answering immediately, James reached across the table, offering his hand palm up, an invitation she had come to recognize. Zoraya hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his, allowing a controlled telepathic connection. The warmth of his feelings flowed through their touch, joy, affection, and a hint of nervousness that matched her own. I'd love to have dinner with you, he said softly. That evening, Zoraya spent an hour preparing herself according to human dating protocols. She wore a flowing dress in Earth style rather than her usual Lizerian robes, though she kept her ceremonial antenna decorations to honor her heritage. James picked her up at her quarters, and Zoraya felt her breath catch at the sight of him in formal attire. He held something behind his back. These are for you, he said, revealing the bouquet of flowers. I researched Lizerian customs too. I know your people exchange bioluminescent plants during courtship, so I found some earth flowers that glow in the dark. Zoraya carefully took the bouquet, touching one delicate petal. The flowers emitted a soft blue light, similar to the sacred blooms of her homeworld. You combine our traditions, she whispered, deeply moved. The restaurant James chose was small and quiet, with private booths designed for interspecies couples. As they settled in, Zoraya noticed other mixed pairs. A Venusian with their human partner, an Andromedean sharing a specialized atmosphere bubble with their Earth date. We're not alone in this, James said, noticing her observation. More species are discovering that love doesn't need to follow traditional paths. Throughout dinner, they talked about everything except their troubles. James shared stories about his childhood, while Zoreya described the crystal forests of Lysiria. When their hands occasionally touched while reaching for things, neither pulled away from the brief telepathic connections. After dinner, they walked through the university's botanical gardens. The path was lit by bioluminescent plants from various worlds, including some from Lysiria. "My people believe that physical intimacy is primitive," Zoreya said, stopping beside a glowing blue flower from her homeworld. "But they never understood that it's not about the method of connection. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone, whether through touch, telepathy, or simply being present." James turned to face her, his expression serious. "Zoreya, whatever happens with the council or the university, I want you to know that I'll support your choice either way. If you need to return home." She silenced him by carefully placing her fingers against his lips, allowing him to feel the depth of her conviction through the telepathic contact. "I'm exactly where I want to be." James gently took her hand from his lips, but didn't let go. Instead, he slowly brought it to his chest, letting her feel his heartbeat. The gesture combined both their ways, physical touch carrying emotional meaning, enhanced by the gentle flow of telepathic connection. In that moment, under the glow of plants from a dozen worlds, Zoreya understood that she wasn't just breaking social barriers. She was helping to build a bridge between two ways of loving, proving that the heart could speak in more languages than either of their species had imagined. 6 months after their first date, Zoreya stood before the Interstellar Cultural Committee, her research findings projected on the massive screen behind her. The audience included representatives from Earth's scientific community, the Lysirian Council, and various other species interested in interspecies relationships. "My research began as a study of human bonding methods," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It became something far more significant, proof that love transcends biological differences." In the front row, James sat beside her parents, who had finally agreed to visit Earth after reading her groundbreaking paper on telepathic and physical bonding integration. Her father's antenna twitched with residual disapproval, but her mother seemed fascinated by how James respectfully wore traditional Lysirian greeting ribbons on his wrists. "Humans were once considered primitive by my people because they lacked telepathic abilities," Zoreya continued. "But they have developed countless beautiful ways to express love and connection. Through my research and personal experience, I discovered that neither method is superior. They are simply different paths to the same destination." She activated a holoscreen showing brain scans. These images show identical emotional responses in both human and Lysirian brains during moments of connection, whether through telepathy or physical touch. Love, it seems, speaks the same language in any nervous system. The presentation concluded with her revolutionary proposal, a new framework for interspecies relationships that combined multiple forms of bonding. The database she had created included guidelines for hundreds of species combinations, helping couples navigate their biological and cultural differences. When she finished speaking, the hall erupted in applause. Even the Lysirian Council members raised their antenna in traditional acknowledgement of valuable research. Professor Martinez, who had once opposed her relationship with James, was now among the loudest supporters. After the presentation, in a quiet corner of the celebration hall, James knelt before Zoreya. Her antenna quivered as she realized what was happening. She had studied this human custom extensively. "Zoreya," James said softly, holding up both a traditional earth ring and a Lysirian bonding crystal, "you've taught me that love doesn't have to choose between worlds. Will you marry me in both human and Lysirian traditions?" She answered in both ways, touching his face to share her joy telepathically while saying yes aloud in English. Around them, the celebration hall's lights dimmed in response to her emotional broadcast, a side effect of pure Lysirian happiness. 2 months later, they held their wedding in the university's botanical gardens. Zoreya wore a dress that combined Earth's white with Lysiria's ceremonial colors, her antenna decorated with tiny earth flowers that glowed like Lizurian crystals. James wore a traditional Earth suit modified with Lizurian bonding robes. The ceremony blended both cultures perfectly. They exchanged rings while sharing traditional telepathic vows, joined hands while their minds touched in the Lizurian bonding dance, and sealed their union with both a human kiss and a telepathic embrace. That evening, as they swayed together during their first dance as a married couple, Zoreya looked around at the gathered crowd. There were other mixed couples in attendance, some who had come forward after reading her research, others who had been inspired by her and James's example. "Look what we started," James whispered, following her gaze. Zoreya squeezed his hand, sending him a pulse of pure love through their touch. "We didn't just study connection," she replied. "We helped create a new way of understanding it." Their story became legend at the university. The Lizurian scientist who came to study human love and ended up revolutionizing interspecies relationships. But for Zoreya and James, it was simpler than that. They had simply discovered what cultures across the galaxy were slowly learning. That love, in all its forms, was the most advanced science of all.